Good evening, I'm David Kramer with Alaska Weather. As always, please visit our website, weather.gov/Alaska. You can get updates to our forecast or check out any watches, warnings, or advisories that we might have out for your area. Also call our weather info line, 1-800-472-0391. Get any updates to the forecast through that means as well. And you can email me at the address at the bottom of the screen, david.kramer@noaa.gov. Starting off, we'll take a look at the 3 advisories that we do have out for the state. These are all wind advisories and focused in and around the Alaska Range. Starting off with the western portions of the Alaska Range, we're going to have gusts up to as high as 60 miles per hour with the highest winds near Denali. And that's going to start at 7 a.m. Thursday until 7 a.m. on Friday. For the eastern portions of the Alaska Range, we could see gusts up to as high as 65 miles per hour. That's going to start 2 a.m. Thursday and go through noon on Friday. And then we also have some stronger winds for the Delta Junction area, and that's going to go from Thursday into Thursday night. As we look at our satellite imagery, we can start with the low pressure system that's moving up towards the Alaska Peninsula, as this is the one that's going to eventually cause those stronger winds through the Alaska Range area, as well as some areas around south central Alaska and southwest Alaska. As we watch this again, we can watch that low pressure system pushing up towards the Alaska Peninsula area with the front out ahead of that system, starting to bring a lot of cloud cover out over the southwestern portion of the state as well as south central Alaska. Looking out a little bit further to the east near the Panhandle area, we have high pressure out over the area that's helping to keep some fair weather conditions for the Panhandle. And finally, we can see a low that's out by northeastern portions of Russia, just to the west of the Bering Strait area, that's bringing some rain and cloud cover and some strong southerly winds up the west coast of the state. As we look now at our weather for the remainder of the day, we do have some westerly winds out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, bringing some lighter rain to those areas until we get closer towards the low that's approaching the Alaska Peninsula, where we're starting to see some heavier rainfall for the eastern Aleutians, Alaska Peninsula, and up to some of the southwest coast as well. This system is also bringing some southerly winds up through the Gulf of Alaska, starting to bring rainfall to the south central areas. Up the west coast of the state, where we have our low near the Seward Peninsula area, those southerly winds are continuing to bring some elevated surf into the Norton Sound area for today. However, we have reached the peak of that high surf and are starting to see a fall in the surf, but it is still going to be higher than normals as we move until around 10 p.m. tonight. Otherwise, we're going to have some rain and fog mix for the Seward Peninsula area and up through the Point Hope area, with some areas of rain extending into some of the western portions of the interior, and rain throughout the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline. Some of those higher elevation areas in the Brooks Range expecting to see snow, and then some rainfall out over the eastern portions of the interior. As we drop down into the Panhandle area, still seeing some fair weather for today. As we move into tonight, continuing to see fair weather conditions for the Panhandle area. However, as we look back out over mainland Alaska, our low that was by the Alaska Peninsula is now pushing out more into the Bristol Bay area. This is allowing for its front to push into southwest Alaska and through Kodiak Island, bringing heavier rainfall to the Alaska Peninsula, southwest Alaska, and south central Alaska. This is going to start to bring up some stronger or higher rainfall amounts for areas around the eastern Kenai Peninsula and the western Susitna Valley. While we don't expect to reach any flood advisory criteria at this time, we are going to see a potential of 2 to 2.5 inches of rainfall from tonight through midday on Thursday for the Seward area. That's going to result in some elevated river levels for rivers like the Resurrection River. As we look up further to the north in the western Susitna Valley, another area that's going to be targeted for some of the heavier rainfall, we could see 1 to 2 inches in that area as well. That's going to be again from tonight through Thursday afternoon, and that's going to result in rivers like the Yentna and Squintna seeing rises, and those could last longer than the rainfall, as some of that rain is going to be coming down from the mountains. So we look at those higher river levels going into Friday for those areas. This system is also going to bring some stronger winds to the area, as we talked about with the advisories later in the night period, getting into Thursday time frame for the Alaska Range and the Delta Junction area. This will also bring some stronger winds to areas around south central, especially gap areas like Turnagain Arm, where we are expecting winds to get up to as high as 75 miles per hour for the Turnagain Arm area and at some higher elevations, and this is going to be for tonight into Thursday. Meanwhile, along the west coast of the state, we're still going to see our low pressure system out by the St. Lawrence Island area, bringing some rainfall to the Norton Sound area as well as some fog, and rain fog up to northern locations of the Kotzebue Sound area as well, with some lighter rain out for the Brooks Range and along the Arctic coastline. Down in the Bering Sea, westerly flow is going to result in rain or lighter rain throughout the Bering and down into the western Aleutian Islands as we have a new system approaching from the west. As you look into Thursday, that low is going to move by the western Aleutian Islands, bringing more rain to the central and western Aleutians. But our main low has pushed in over southwest Alaska with its front moving into more of the western interior and through south central Alaska, bringing that heavier rain and stronger winds throughout south central Alaska, southwest Alaska, down by the Alaska Peninsula, and Kodiak Island. High pressure remains strong out over the western or eastern portions of the Gulf of Alaska, keeping fair weather for much of the Panhandle. However, that rain is creeping in from the west. As we look up more into the interior, central and western interior, you're going to see some rain as well as some of the west coast, and then into the central portions of the Brooks Range as well. Still going to see fog around the west coast from St. Lawrence Island up through the Point Hope area, and then in the far eastern portions of the Arctic coastline. As we look into Friday, low pressure systems a little bit weaker out over much of the northern portion of the state, continuing to bring rainfall throughout all of mainland Alaska, with some areas of snow up in the Brooks Range and the mountain ranges around south central, and then an area of mixed rain and snow just off the Arctic coastline with some areas of fog up there as well. Southwesterly winds out over the northern portions of the Bering going to push in and bring more rain to southwest Alaska, and a new low pressure system out by the eastern Aleutian Islands going to bring more rain to the central and eastern Aleutians as well as the Alaska Peninsula. Way out east, as we look into the Panhandle area, we are going to see some rainfall finally making its way back into the Panhandle area as that high pressure has finally moved off, and we are seeing some of the westerly flow off of the Gulf moving into the area. Finally, way out to the west, we have another system approaching the western Aleutian Islands, bringing rain closer to the area on Friday. Taking a look at our temperatures starting off Thursday morning, down in the Aleutian Islands, temperatures dropping down into the mid-40s. Mid-40s as well for the Alaska Peninsula. And so we move into the Bristol Bay area, temperatures in the mid to upper 40s, with places like Iliamna only getting down to 50 degrees. Lower to mid-40s for much of the rest of southwest Alaska and into the Seward Peninsula area. As we move into the interior, we are going to see temperatures dropping down into the 40s for central and eastern locations, but as we move up further to the north, we are going to see temperatures down into the 30s with 29 through the pass. Up along the Arctic coastline, temperatures down into the mid-30s. Down in south central Alaska, temperatures are going to drop down into the 40s for most locations. However, some places right along the Gulf are going to stay around 50 degrees, with Homer only getting down to 52. Down in the Panhandle area, temperatures dropping down into the 40s for most locations. However, some of those locations further to the south near Annette are going to stay right around 50 degrees. As we look into Thursday afternoon for our highs, temperatures right around 70 degrees for the southern portions of the Panhandle with some of the clear skies. Still going to see quite a bit of warmer temperatures down there. But as we have some of the cloud cover further to the north in the Panhandle, temperatures only getting up into the 50s. Mid-50s for much of south central Alaska, and mid-50s for much of the interior as well. However, Fairbanks is going to get up to 61 degrees. For up through the Brooks Range, and temperatures in the 40s, and then in the mid-40s for the Arctic coast as well. Down by the Seward Peninsula, upper 40s to lower 50s. Down in the southwestern portions of the state, lower to mid-50s are expected. In the lower 50s for the Alaska Peninsula, and primarily lower 50s for the Aleutian Islands, with Atka getting down to 49, or getting up to 49 rather, and 52 for St. Paul. Low temperatures for Friday morning down into the mid-40s for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula, as well as much of southwest Alaska and the west coast and western interior. Lower to mid-40s for much of the rest of the interior, with 30s in the Brooks Range and mid-30s along the Arctic coastline. Down in south central Alaska, temperatures dropping down into the mid-40s, getting warmer once again as we get closer towards the Gulf. Middleton Island only getting down to 50 degrees. Down in the Panhandle area, northern locations dropping down to the mid-40s, and then down to the lower 50s for areas further to the south. Friday afternoon, highs for the Panhandle and the lower locations, or southern locations, we're going to get up into the right around 60 degrees. 50s for northern locations, mid-50s for much of south central Alaska and much of the central and eastern interior. into the mid to upper 40s for western interior out to the Seward Peninsula area, mid 50s for southwest Alaska, and low 50s for the Aleutian Islands and Alaska Peninsula. Along the Arctic coastline, temperatures going to get up into the 40s for the most part. Wainwright only getting up to 39 degrees.
And now, aviation weather around Alaska.
For aviation, we'll start with a look at our flying weather on Thursday morning. Out over the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, we do have widespread MVFR conditions with some areas of IFR embedded in there, especially out by the central and western Aleutian Islands. As you move over mainland Alaska, quite a bit of areas with MVFR conditions in the southern mainland, primarily at higher elevations and in areas near the North Gulf Coast. We're also going to have some areas of IFR mixed in with some of these locations, such as eastern parts of the Kenai Peninsula and some of the Chugach Range. In the interior, primarily VFR conditions are expected, and in the Brooks Range, we're going to see some IFR conditions. And then on the North Slope, going back down to VFR. Down in the Panhandle area, VFR conditions are expected. Thursday afternoon, continuing to see VFR conditions for the Panhandle area. And you're going to see continued MVFR conditions for much of the southern mainland. However, some of those IFR areas will have cleared up. Still some areas along the North Gulf Coast, however. Up in the interior, central and eastern locations, still going to be VFR, but more MVFR conditions as we get further to the west and as we get further to the north towards the Brooks Range. Most of the North Slope should be VFR, however, some of the areas right along the coastline look like they could be MVFR as well. Down in the Bering Sea and Aleutians, primarily MVFR conditions are expected, but once again, out to areas further to the west, we are going to see some IFR conditions. For Friday morning, primarily MVFR conditions for all of the Bering Sea and Aleutians. Continuing to see MVFR conditions for the southern mainland as well. Or higher elevations in the mountain ranges, we are going to see some IFR conditions. Down in the Panhandle area, MVFR conditions will have moved in with northern locations seeing some IFR as well. Central and eastern portions of the interior expected to be VFR, but as we get further to the west and all along the west coast, MVFR conditions are expected. Up along the Arctic coastline and through the Brooks Range, going to see a lot of IFR conditions. As we move into Friday afternoon, going to continue to see IFR conditions for western portions of the Arctic coastline, and then we're going to see IFR conditions through the Brooks Range. Much of the central and western portions of mainland Alaska expected to be down in MVFR conditions, and down in south central Alaska, a mixture of MVFR and VFR conditions at low-lying areas. Down in the Panhandle, expecting to see primarily MVFR, but northern locations once again are going to see some IFR conditions. In the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands, widespread MVFR conditions are expected Friday afternoon. Through the passes in Anaktuvuk, starting off IFR, improving to marginal conditions in the afternoon. Adigan will also start off IFR, improve to MVFR. Lake Clark should be IFR throughout the day. However, Merrill will start off IFR and then improve to MVFR conditions in the afternoon. Rainy will start off IFR, improving to marginal in the afternoon. Windy Pass should stay MVFR throughout the day on Thursday, as well as Isabel Pass. Mentasta, however, should be VFR throughout the day Thursday. Tanita should be down in marginal conditions all day, with Portage down all the way to IFR all day on Thursday. Chilkoot and White should be VFR all day Thursday. Looking out at freezing levels, we have some colder air being pushed down into much of the Bering Sea with a freezing level of 4,000 feet, stretching just to the south of the eastern Aleutian Islands. Out further to the east, we have some areas of warmer air coming up with freezing levels as high as 12,000 feet over the Panhandle area. Looking at our icing over much of the western portion of the state, we have icing above 7,000 feet for much of the interior, out towards the west coast, and then above 5,000 feet as we get closer towards the Bristol Bay area. Out by St. Lawrence Island and St. Matthew Island, above 6,000 feet is expected. And then down in the southwestern portions of the Bering Sea, above 7,000 feet is expected. For our jet stream, strongest portion of the jet is coming in towards the western Aleutian Islands out of a northwesterly direction, 130 knots, and then coming back up towards mainland Alaska out of a southwesterly direction over Kodiak Island, around 105 knots, dropping down to around 90 knots out over the Brooks Range area out of a southwesterly direction. Taking a look at 9,000 feet, strongest flow is around our low pressure system out by the Bristol Bay area, up to as high as 60 knots out of a southwesterly direction, just south of Kodiak Island, and then another area of 60 knots out of that southwest direction over south central. It's going to drop down to around 30 knots as we get closer towards the interior, and 35 knots over northern portions of the Panhandle. Out over the Aleutian Islands, northwesterly winds 35 to 40 knots are expected. At 3,000 feet, going to see westerly winds over the western Aleutians, 30 knots, but we're going to have our strongest winds once again around our low pressure system out of a northwesterly direction by the Alaska Peninsula. 60 knots are expected, dropping down to 40 knots out by the eastern Aleutian Islands. Then picking back up to 60 knots as we head towards Prince William Sound area out of a south to southeasterly direction, dropping down over the rest of mainland Alaska, 35 knots over southwest and over much of the interior. Taking a look at our turbulence, quite a bit of turbulence with those stronger winds with our system moving closer towards the southern mainland, below 6,000 feet over much of south central, below 4,000 feet as we get by the Alaska Peninsula and eastern Aleutians, and then below 3,000 feet for the western Aleutian Islands.
Welcome to another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with the National Weather Service, and joining us today, two more people to talk about the augmented reality sandbox. It's Alana Valaji. She's a University of Alaska Fairbanks mechanical engineering student, helped design and work on the details to make this new type of sandbox there. Thanks for joining us, Alana. Thanks. And Courtney Breest, she's the outreach coordinator for AKwx, which is the experimental program to stimulate competitive research. It's a program funded nationally by the National Science Foundation, right?
Yes.
Okay. Alana, tell us about how you changed and adapted this version of the augmented reality sandbox. It's a really cool tool.
So Gina approached us with 3 goals for this new version of the sandbox. They wanted it to be compact in a light system that could travel around the state. They wanted it to be child-oriented, so we designed the sandbox to have 3 different levels.
Okay.
It's pretty cool. You can have younger children, you can have high school kids. I guess I should say high school teenagers.
Sure.
And then we also designed it to be more marketable, user-friendly, so that this could be seen eventually in classrooms all over the place, all over the state.
Okay. And you had a big hand in this, but this was a team approach, right?
Definitely. It was a really good experience for myself, for George Stevens, who we'll see later.
One of our hand models today. Yeah.
For 2 other members who aren't here today, Cody Klingman and Austin Hunt. And it was just a really good learning experience all around.
Very good. And this is something that is part of your learning experience as well, so you get to check a box in your education.
Yeah,
right?
it's a requirement for seniors of mechanical engineering at University of Alaska Fairbanks.
Very good. Very good. Well, it is a wonderfully inquisitive tool, fun to play with, and I hope to get my hands in the sand here in just a little bit. But it's also part of a bigger program, something that we were talking about a moment ago, AKwx, and that's what Courtney is here to tell us more about. What is AKwx and why do you need a sandbox?
Well, AKwx, as you mentioned, is a national program. We're funded nationally, but we're actually located statewide. We're at UAF, we're at UAA, we're in Southeast at UAS, and she mentioned, you know, taking the sandbox as an educational tool, and that's where I'm an outreach coordinator for the South Central test case.
Okay.
Our focus is on the Kenai watershed, and we are really interested in using these tools like the sandbox to interact with the students down there and get them interested in STEM and also communicate the research findings that we've been having throughout the state.
Okay. And one of those, as George and Eric are kind of changing the contours for us there from UAF to maybe something that resembles a little bit of something more of the Kenai watershed, which is one of your focuses for the study, right? And specifically looking at some of the changes there and how that impacts people and also the salmon.
Yes, it is all of our research is social and environmental.
Okay.
So we have social scientists working hand in hand with our environmental scientists. One of the things we're studying is Upper Russian Lake, and we have a researcher taking sediment cores from that lake. So one of the things we're going to use the sandbox to communicate is how the landscape changed over a long period of time, thousands of years, going from glacier, covered by glacier ice, to being filled with water. And then
that's what they're doing right now.
Exactly. So
live.
So they're
so
moving
cool.
the water around. And then I think they've got some props over there, because we're also going to go a little bit more in depth and explain how the salmon got there.
Okay.
So using
there's
these,
the salmon.
Exactly. Oh, I think there's a few more.
Yeah, we like more salmon in Alaska. More salmon.
Yeah, exactly. So it's really taking the findings from our research grant and just trying to connect with the community and translate it in a really hands-on and exciting way, so people can, you know, interact with us as much as possible.
Well, sure. That makes the learning and the science real and quite literally in your face, rather than just some boring black and white paper that you have to read about. This is something that people can understand better because it's visual and they're touching and feeling and seeing these changes, right?
Yeah, and get them engaged. And then outreach is a huge component, and working with the younger students, and actually even, I mean, working with the UAF graduate and engineering students it's a huge part of our grant, and we really enjoy it.
Oh, it is wonderfully exciting. And so, Alana, you were telling us that this is built to travel.
Right.
And this is built to do more things than version 1. Where can this type of project go in Alaska? And what can it demonstrate?
I mean, we were hoping to eventually get to villages that were harder to reach, that you couldn't necessarily move a whole fixed instrument to, right? You need something that can pack up, fit in your truck bed. I mean, one of the most attractive parts of this project is that this was going to be something that was used past our graduation point. You know, this is going to be something that lives in the state for years.
Right, right. Well, it looks like you're well on your way with that. So what are, give me another example. What else can this show us? We've talked about the Kenai River watershed. What's the coolest thing that you've played in the sand with? What's your idea?
Well, I definitely enjoy the props, but we also like kind of building up a giant mound, and if you put some water behind it, you can make a little runway, I guess, and you know, demonstrate the effects of the hydrology by just putting up a dam and letting it all pour right down. And so that could, I think you mentioned it earlier, you could even demonstrate the effects of a tsunami.
Right.
Or something along those lines.
So it's not just topography, but it's also hydrology and coastal surge mapping and some of the coastal changes that we're seeing here in Alaska, and seeing what the smaller changes in the sandbox might do to kind of a real effect of a slosh or a push of water up on the coast. Tsunami inundation mapping, or even glacial dam release, as some has been demonstrated before. So wow, that's just an impressive thing. That it seems like the possibilities are nearly endless with this, and probably even more ideas that are popping up in your head too.
Yeah, as we speak.
Very cool. All right. Well, if folks want to get more information about EPSCoR, you guys are online. You're on Facebook, Twitter, and on YouTube. AKEPSCOR, right? EPSCoR, Alaska EPSCoR, that is. And again, you guys are funded by the National Science Foundation, so more to come from that, and a longer-term study there. Thank you, ladies, for joining us today. Congratulations on your hard work there. This is really fun. And for now, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider with this edition of Alaska Weather Facts, and I'm going to go play in the sandbox there. We'll see you next time.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
Welcome back for the marine section. Quick look at the ice edge. Not a lot of change. Navigational waters continue to be ice-free. Looking down into southeast on Thursday, inside waters, variable winds in the central and southern inside waters around 5 knots. And as we get into the Lynn Canal area, southerly winds at 20 knots are expected. Out over the Gulf waters, southeasterly winds 5 knots for the south areas, getting up to as high as 20 to 25 knots as we get closer towards Yakutat. In the very northern areas, we have easterly winds 40 knots with seas up to as high as 9 feet. For Friday in the southeast, in the inside waters, southerly winds 15 to 20 knots expected, till the southern inside waters where we'll have northwesterly winds around 10 knots. Out over the Gulf waters, in the eastern locations, northwesterly winds 15 to 20 knots, becoming more easterly and eventually southwesterly, or becoming more westerly 20 knots, and then eventually southwesterly 15 knots as we near Yakutat, and southerly winds 25 knots in the northern areas with 11 feet for seas. Thursday for south central Alaska, out over the Gulf waters, east to southeast winds 30 knots in western locations and northern parts of the Gulf, 40 knots, with seas up to as high as 15 feet, riding along the barrier jet, pushing closer towards Prince William Sound. In Prince William Sound itself, easterly winds 35 knots, with seas up to as high as 9 feet. In Cook Inlet area, northeasterly winds 20 to 25 knots, with seas 5 to 6 feet, and then to the west of the Barren Islands, easterly winds 35 knots, with seas at 9 feet. On Friday in the Cook Inlet area, south to southwest winds 20 to 30 knots, strongest as we get in the south parts of Cook Inlet. Around the Barren Islands, westerly winds 30 knots. And out over the rest of the Gulf, south to southwest winds 25 to 30 knots. And in Prince William Sound, southeasterly winds 20 knots expected. For the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island on Thursday, circulation around the low near Kodiak Island is going to be southerly on the south and east sides of Kodiak Island, 30 to 40 knots. North or southeasterly in Shelikof Strait at 25 knots, and then westerly out over the Bristol Bay area, 30 knots expected. Seas up to as high as 16 feet, highest on the Pacific side. Further west on the Alaska Peninsula, west to northwest winds 35 to 40 knots. On Friday, flow is going to switch up to be south to southwest in all locations, 25 to 30 knots on the Pacific side, 20 to 25 knots on the Bering side, and 25 knots through Shelikof Strait. Thursday for the Aleutian Islands, west to southwest winds at all locations, 20 to 25 knots by the western Aleutians, 15 to 20 knots for the central Aleutians, and 30 knots for the eastern Aleutians. Then on Friday, you're going to continue to see primarily westerly winds, 25 to 35 knots for the eastern Aleutians, strongest on the Pacific side, around 30 knots for the central Aleutians, and 20 to 25 knots for the western Aleutian Islands. Along the west coast of the state, north to northwest winds, 15 to 20 knots north of Nunavik Island, 30 knots south of Nunavik Island, northwesterly winds 20 knots by St. Matthew Island, westerly winds 20 knots by the Pribilof Islands, and northeasterly winds 20 knots for the Norton Sound. As we look into Friday, flow is out of a primarily westerly direction, west 20 knots all along the coastline, and then 15 knots by St. Matthew Island and 15 knots by the Pribilof Islands. Along the Arctic coastline, easterly winds 10 knots expected, picking up to 15 to 20 knots down the west coast, and then through the Bering Strait area, switching and becoming northerly at 15 knots. On Friday, along the Arctic coastline, still primarily in easterly direction, 25 to 30 knots, becoming northeasterly along the northwest coast, down to 25 knots down the west coast and becoming more northerly, and then northwest 20 as we get through the Bering Strait area. Quick recap for tonight's weather. We have multiple lows moving through the area. The strongest low is out by Bristol Bay with its front pushing into southwest Alaska. This is going to bring heavy rains to the eastern peninsula, including the Seward area, as well as the Susitna Valley, especially in the western part of the Susitna Valley. Otherwise, we're going to see some heavier rain throughout all of south central Alaska, southwest Alaska, down through the Alaska Peninsula and Kodiak Island, and some stronger winds developing through areas of Turnagain Arm and through the Alaska Range and Delta Junction areas where we have wind advisories out through the Alaska Range and Delta Junction, primarily through early tomorrow morning through the beginning of Friday. In the interior, we're going to see some lighter rain showers and some light rain through the Brooks Range and Arctic coastline, as well as some rain and fog down some of the west coast. The Panhandle area will stay with fair weather, and we'll have some light showers out through the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. As we move into Thursday, the main low is pushing further into southwest Alaska, continuing to bring the heavier rain through the southern mainland down through the Alaska Peninsula, with high pressure keeping fair weather for the Panhandle, and some rain moving now into more of the interior as well as the Brooks Range, with some fog along the Arctic coastline and west coast. Out over the Bering Sea, another low is moving in by the western Aleutian Islands, bringing some rain showers throughout the Bering Sea and Aleutian Islands. With Alaska Weather, I'm David Kramer. Thanks for being with us tonight.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.